Well, we will go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce our impressive trainer today. Donny Phillips is a 29-year industry expert who has served in leadership for multiple human resource and payroll service providers, including some of the largest third-party administrators and employment and income verification vendors. During his career, Donny has consulted with and provided services to employers of all sizes, from the largest to the Fortune 100 to local small businesses, as well as local governments and federal government agencies. Donny is passionate about helping clients optimize programs while focusing on doing the right thing for all stakeholder groups. So we're super excited to have Donny here with us. And for everyone that's joining for the first time, the Mobrium webinar series is SHRM PDC eligible. So this event qualifies for 0.75 credit hours. You'll get a follow-up email within 2 days of this event that will have the unique activity code to claim those credits, as well as a recording of this event. So watch for that email to come out. And we'll go ahead and pass this off to Donny and get started here with the material for today. So I'll hand that over to you, Donny.
We'll be featured like after.
And perfect. I'll also be watching chat. So if you have questions, put them there. And Donny, I may stop you if we've got something that's relevant to that slide.
Well, Matt, I appreciate it. One piece of housekeeping I might ask, if you're not actively chiming in with a question, maybe to mute your line. I do hear a little bit of background noise popping in there. Thank you for that. Yeah, so really excited for the opportunity to cover the exciting topic of HR's role in third-party data protection. It is probably something that's not front of mind for a lot of HR professionals. We would implore them to maybe move it a little closer to front of mind, and we'll talk about why that's the case today. So again, if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session. We'll try to keep it interesting and try to keep it moving along here. Can someone just confirm for me that you're seeing the title slide appropriately here on the screen?
Yep, that looks good. Thanks, Donny.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, we'll jump into this. I do want to give a little bit of background about, well, Matt kind of already covered my background. Thank you for that. Give you a little bit of info about Vault Verify, so you kind of know who we are and what we do before we jump into the training content. So I'm really only going to focus on the right side of this since Matt gave my intro. Vault Verify has been around for over a decade at this point. We are fully committed to basically be a better solution for all stakeholders in the process of automated employment and income verifications. I'm not going to delve into that today. That's not the purpose of today's session. We are currently trusted by over 5,000 customers in the U.S., recommended by numerous industry-leading solution partners in the HR tech and HR business process outsource industries. We historically have maintained a 99% client retention rate, and we take pride in the fact that we are a privacy-optimized model when we talk about our data practices. So we always like to pop up some of those organizations that we participate with and partner with to make sure we're staying on the front end of privacy legislation and privacy obligations. So having said that, we got a few things we're going to cover today, really primarily focused on third-party employee data breaches. We know those are on the rise. There was a 2025 Verizon data breach investigation report indicating that third-party involvement in breaches has doubled, essentially, rising from about 15% of all breaches to about 30% just in a one-year time. We believe that surge highlights that there is growing risk around working with third-party vendors and enabling their access to sensitive employee data. And when you think about, the sheer volume doubling, you also want to consider that there is a rapid increase in the cost associated with those breaches. There's an IBM Ponemon Institute does an annual report, and in their most recent data breach report, they indicate about a 5% increase in cost on average when it's related to a third-party breach versus a direct breach. We believe, and the report actually vets out that it's due to organizations really having less control over the security practices of those third-party vendors, which does make them vulnerable to different types of attacks that can lead to pretty significant financial and reputational damage. So having said all that, that's kind of the tee up. We're going to get into talking about what are the risk factors, what are the ones that are increasing, what are some of those cost trends related to the third-party breaches. We want to make sure we talk about some of the consequences, maybe some that aren't front of mind as well. And then more importantly, I think the real interest for today is to get into some topics around or some discussion around what HR can do, how HR can help, what kind of practices can you institute to mitigate some of these risks. What are some additional benefits beyond just mitigating the cost implication of third-party risk or third-party data breaches? And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A, and hopefully we'll have 5 minutes or so here at the end to get into any questions y'all may have. So let's get started here. I want to talk about some of those factors that we see increasing. And more and more employers are relying on third-party services, including vendors and suppliers and different contractors. And we see these things growing or becoming more common for businesses because there's obviously opportunity for cost savings and efficiencies when you outsource or rely on these third-party solutions. But it does come with some risks. One is that there are potentially some weaknesses in those third parties' security measures. Many of those third-party vendors that employers work with may not have the same level of robust security measures as that employer has in place. And that does make them vulnerable to different types of attacks that could be exploited through access to the client's system or access to the client's data that third party's being entrusted with. We also know that there are some supply chain vulnerabilities out there. There have been attacks targeting third-party vendors in the supply chain, such as SolarWinds and Kaseya attacks that have happened recently. And those they've demonstrated the potential for widespread damage when just a single weak link is being compromised. Another common factor or common risk factor is credential abuse, machine credentials. When we talk about automation and AI technology, some of those credentials become maybe a little more vulnerable. Those attackers are increasingly exploiting those compromised or weak credentials within the third-party ecosystems. That includes machine credentials used by various automated systems to gain access and to escalate credential privileges. And then the last thing here on these increasing factors are really around fourth-party risks. So, those impact of a third-party breach can extend to fourth-party relationships where the vendor's also compromised. So that further expands the scope of those types of breaches. So what I'd like to do here is maybe shift over and talk about why those breaches are so costly, kind of talk through some of the factors, but I think more importantly to understand what's driving those costs before we switch over to maybe some things that we can put into place to mitigate those risks. And I am going to pause here real quick before diving into this, because one thing with my session in presenter mode, Matt, I may ask you if there's a relevant question that pops into the chat box, if you could maybe just chime in and let me know there's a question out there, because I actually can't see the chat box while I'm doing the presenter mode.
Yeah, no questions yet. But I actually did have one. So on that previous slide, so you mentioned fourth party risks, and to me, it almost feels kind of like a real estate domino effect. Like you need to sell your house and you need your house to be bought, like before the other house can be bought. So it's like there could be multiple dominoes up to, I don't know, fifth or sixth party risk. I don't know. But have you seen that extend really far down this chain of, I guess, passing risk along? And at what point does a company, like how far in should a company track or ask about when they're vetting a new vendor?
Yeah, great question, Matt. And what I'll say, maybe from a little bit different angle, what we have seen over the last, say, 15 to 18 months is more of our customers and potential customers issuing better due diligence around third parties, including fourth party assessments when we talk about InfoSec reviews and those types of questionnaires around data practices. We have seen some of the more leading edge employers or sophisticated employers including questions around the vendor's vendor. So from our perspective here at Vault Verify, we do get questions around what are the InfoSec requirements and obligations that we put in place with any vendors or contractors that we may use. And I'll say that's, while it does add a little complexity to going through that due diligence, I appreciate and encouraged by the fact that employers are going to that level. Now, it's not common today. I expect to see that increase in terms of the frequency, to have those employers going to that level, to basically say, look, we don't need to just vet your practices. We need to vet the practices you mandate of your vendors, because if your vendors have a weakness and you're our vendor, now you've brought in potentially a fourth party risk for us as that employer. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, I've actually experienced this on the vendor side, looking to get a partnership with the new company and filling out their vendor risk assessment. And they were asked about not just our practices, but our vendors as well. So I've lived that.
Yep. Perfect. Okay. Well, let's shift over and talk about what's driving the cost. So we talked about some of those increasing risks. Let's talk about what's driving the costs up. So one, when we're talking about a third party, there's definitely extended attack surface is one angle. And what that means is that there are many more opportunities for a bad actor to get into the sensitive data that is part of that third party relationship. So when organizations are relying on numerous third party vendors for various services, that certainly broadens the attack surface and the opportunity for those bad actors to find a point of entry for some of their unsavory activities. It is difficult to manage the risk. It's difficult for an employer to manage security practices for numerous third-party vendors. That process of trying to manage risk across, 8, 10, 12 different outsourced vendors is complex. It's very resource intensive, because I know just from our experience, when we go through some of these InfoSec due diligence processes, we're talking 200-300 questions, and often we have to include evidence to support the answers, and it does get to be pretty cumbersome. And then when you begin to replicate that over and over for multiple vendors, it becomes difficult for an employer to manage that. And then if you have a situation where a third-party vendor is breached, that sensitive data is exposed, that belongs to your organization, potentially your customers. And obviously the reputational impact there can be pretty extensive. You lose customer trust. Again, the reputation is on the line there. The remediation process for third-party breaches is often very complex. Unfortunately, it typically results in some contentious legal battles, very difficult process of that reputational repair, kind of mentioned in the prior bullet. And all those things kind of drive to that increased cost compared to, a direct breach. And we're by no means suggesting that a direct breach is acceptable. We don't want any of those things to happen, but there really is just it's kind of a higher level of risk, higher potential for cost when we're talking these third-party processes. And again, some of the specifics are listed here at the bottom, just trying to figure out what happened. So the time and effort it takes to complete the detection and figure out how to respond to whatever may have occurred. And then again, regulatory fines and legal fees could be a pretty big factor here, because there are some situations where certain vendors may or may not be beholden to the same regulatory oversight. They may not have the same obligations as an employer. So it's trying to determine, okay, if something did happen, who's on the hook for maybe some of the non-compliance or regulatory fines that may occur. If it's a mishandling on the vendor who is not governed by the same oversight as the employer, who owns that? And that's where we could talk about getting into some pretty contentious legal battles and some painful processes trying to solve where that goes. And I do like to include some context, just some recent examples of costs tied to these types of third-party breaches. So again, just talking about, we know that the overall average cost of data breaches increased to about $4.88 million in 2024, which is about a 10% bump for the compared to the prior year. And the studies show that the third-party breaches have a pretty big hand in that increase overall. Some of the feedback, including a Deloitte survey that we're referencing here, showing those third-party failures can cost between $500 million and $1 billion per instance. Now, obviously, those are for large enterprise customers or large enterprise employers, but it's really meant to emphasize the risk potential here for employers who don't have their hands around these third-party data practices. The last one I'll mention is a telecommunications provider had experienced a breach in 2023. That resulted in the exposure of personal information for over 40 million customers. Now, we're not going to name names there, but I would assume a lot of folks on this session probably are familiar with the organization that experienced that breach. And I think we want to reference that one because that's a good example of the reputational damage. I believe there was probably a significant outflow of customers after that, and everybody's well aware of the organization when they experience that type of negative activity. And then I think the last thing I want to talk about before we get into maybe some of the more actionable pieces of today's discussion is maybe some of the additional impacts here. And we've talked about the reputational damage, but I think a couple of things that don't necessarily come to mind immediately, and the one I'll highlight here is the operational disruptions. And we've experienced this. We've had customers in the sales process that has had an incident, we'll say, and it's put everything on hold. In fact, they shift to an all hands on deck model to get their hands around what is occurring or what has occurred and how do they solve it, how do they get back in motion from an operational standpoint, and it just puts everything on hold for days or even weeks at a time. So beyond just the disruption to the operations, imagine the costs that occur there for an organization that may be a manufacturing organization that is not producing any product for days or weeks at a time. The financial impact there cannot possibly be overstated. And we've already talked about the regulatory and reputational damage, but I'm going to pause here and just see if there are any questions in the chat, Matt, before I move over to really getting into what can we actually do.
Yeah, no new chats, but anybody's welcome to unmute as well along the way. But I would definitely agree that there is a real reputational damage that occurs when that happens, because people hear about it, and you can build your reputation for years, but it can be damaged in a moment when something goes wrong. So definitely agree with you on that.
Yep, that's a great point, Matt. Decades of reputational positive experience can just be destroyed in a moment. All right. Well, here's what I think most people wanted to join the session about today, and it's really to talk
it looks
about.
Like we did have one comment just now from Stephen Curler. Business disruption. It takes companies 4 to 6 weeks to recover from a breach.
Thanks for that, Steve. Good to hear from you this afternoon. I know Steve well. He's absolutely one of the data privacy experts that we lean on here at Vault Verify. So, Steve, I'm glad you were able to join today. So yeah, shifting over to some of the best practices, and we could spend a lot of time on these things. You'll see there's a couple highlighted. These are the ones that I will primarily focus on today, but we will talk through each of these because I think there is some value to just understand the positioning here. So let's start with knowing the applicable data privacy laws. And I would say if there's any folks here that operate in California or exist or reside in California, probably very familiar with the California Privacy Rights Act and the CCPA. But, not everybody really pays that close of attention to the data privacy laws that are ever expanding. We've seen a lot of growth in the privacy laws across the U.S. in the last half a decade or so. So really, it's about understanding legal obligations. The employers have to be aware of and comply with relevant federal, state, and potentially even international data privacy laws and those regulations around how they collect, store, and use an employee data. Some examples of that include the GDPR, the CCPA or CPRA, and HIPAA. Creating policies that line up with those laws, that's obviously something employers have to do, and they have to work with their legal teams or legal counsel to develop those internal policies. But they should have policies that clearly outline how each employee's personal data will be collected, how it's secured, how it may be used, how it's disposed of, and really make sure all of those practices align with the applicable legal requirements. Employers have to establish clear policies and procedures around employee privacy. So this is where the recommendation is to have a detailed employee privacy policy that clearly outlines what data is collected, why it's collected, how it's used, and then how it's protected. That's an area that I would say, quite honestly, we see deficiency across many organizations. So that's an area we're pushing very hard to try to see improvements in terms of the policies of employers out there. I think the other thing around the policies and procedures, and we'll hammer on this a bit, and it is the practice of data minimization, and that is really enforcing policies for third parties and even internally. The data is only collected when it's necessary for a legitimate business purpose. Basically, avoid unnecessary data collection, and that'll help you minimize risks. The policy should be transparent and consent. So the employees should be pretty well informed about how their data is collected, and how it's used. And in certain instances, the law may require clear and informed consent from the employees before collecting or using the data. The ecosystem that Vault Verify operates in does have some employee consent requirements. And again, this isn't meant to be a sales pitch by any means, but I would say we're very, very well versed in the employee consent requirements, because I think we have simply the best practices in the industry around that expectation. And then the last policy I think is pretty critical for employers is, understanding the data retention policies of their third parties. So they need to have definition around how long the employee data is kept, how it's secured, how it is securely disposed of when no longer needed, or what the employer's preference is in terms of the destruction of that employee data. The next piece here is strong security measures. I'm not going to touch on this a whole heck of a lot. Most employers do have their InfoSec team or global risk and compliance teams working around the clock on the security measures. So, this is something that HR should be well versed in, but and maybe have some influence over, but this is a process that, the InfoSec, the global risk and compliance, or global privacy, that's a title we're seeing more and more these days. Those individuals would typically oversee the security measures. And some of it's going to be duplicative of things we've talked about. So access controls, data encryption, storage and transmission of that information. I'm not going to deep dive into those things, but that's kind of what rolls into that strong security measures. We also advocate for the education or training of employees around security awareness. That's something that I know, again, the space I've been in for the last nearly 3 decades has been a priority for virtually every organization I've worked with. We go through quarterly and annual security awareness training, and it's around data protection principles. What are the data subject rights? Learning to recognize different types of security threats like phishing. And then obviously best practices around handling sensitive information. That is to arm the employees with all of that knowledge is always certainly going to be beneficial to you as an employer. And conducting some types of audits and assessments, typically annually, but I will say some of the more sophisticated employers are doing biannual audits where they're going back through those InfoSec reviews. They may not be full versions like the onboarding due diligence steps that employers put in place, like say when they're switching to our service, but they do have some key updates that they're doing biannually or annually, just confirming, the encryption policies still exist as they were, and different data protection impact assessments that occur regularly. The two I really wanted to focus on here, where I think human resources can have some pretty significant influence, and it's around managing those third-party risks. So I talked about the vendor due diligence, and I've talked about the InfoSec piece of this, but I think from an HR perspective, you have a pretty unique opportunity to influence the process by gaining a good understanding of the data use needs for the third party. So how is that data being used? How is it facilitating whatever you're outsourcing to that vendor? And how do you minimize the data engagement? So is there an opportunity to eliminate data engagement, data usage, data transmittal for certain subsets of your population, or could it be data doesn't get used or touched or stored for employees who don't have a need under the outsourced solution contract or outsourced solution agreement? And then I guess that kind of ties right back into that last item, and that's the deploying those need-based access controls. And again, that's getting that full understanding of what is the need for the data, what data elements within the integration or transmittal of data are actually needed on a given use case. And I know it sounds like a little bit of an ask for HR, but I think it is imperative for HR to take those steps and be able to weigh in on the due diligence, the larger due diligence process when you're assessing the data practices of any vendor or any third party that you're looking to engage with. I'm going to pause again because I feel like I just gave a lot there and see if there are any questions or comments.
I'll keep watching for some more comments, but I had one on that second point around policies. I know that a lot of individuals here are familiar with SHRM, obviously, and they have lots of different template policies, but do you have any recommendations of where HR leaders could find some template data protection policies that they could add to their employee handbook, or like where they should be searching for relevant things to include there?
Yeah, really great starting point, Matt, would be to reach out to us at Vault Verify. We have some suggested language there. We're happy to share that up front, even if it's someone who's not a customer of ours, because as I mentioned, we're really committed to doing the right thing for the stakeholders. So we can assist with that. And there are some resources out there. I would suspect, Matt, that SHRM that you mentioned, if you did some digging around there, there's probably some boilerplate language available as well.
Okay.
But when we wrap up, we'll have some contact information, our website, my email address. Again, happy to provide resources or give some direction to some of those assets to help you out.
Cool. That's awesome. Thanks, Donny.
Sure.
Oh, let's see. We've got one comment here. Oh, yeah. Stephen was just saying he has to jump for a meeting.
Okay. No problem. All right. Well, let's jump over to talk about some of the additional impacts. So I guess before I move to this slide, just to kind of tie a ribbon around this last slide, these are really best practices that if we can get all of these things instituted for your organization, and you can weigh in and influence those areas that you have the ability to influence, you are going to dramatically reduce and mitigate those potential risks for those third parties you're working with. These things are, I think it's pretty safe to say, some of the benefits here are, what's the word I'm looking for? They're pretty obvious. When you talk about minimizing the data access, every record that's not shared, every piece of employee information that's not shared is a direct reduction in potential risk. Because if it's not shared, there's no potential exposure there. When we go pretty regularly and confirm the data practices and the data policies align with expectation, we confirm that annually. We confirm that the vendors and third parties are meeting our obligatory expectations. Obviously, that's going to reduce risk because your expectations are designed for the sole purpose of reducing risk and making sure the data is managed properly. So I think it's pretty obvious the impacts here. But the one thing I did want to cover is on this next slide, just some maybe less obvious impacts to implementing these best practice procedures. So we've already talked about the legal compliance. That probably goes by pretty easily. But if we talk about the employee trust, so when you think about I guess the core of a positive employer-employee relationship, it's based on trust. So when employees share that personal information, they expect it to be handled with care and confidentiality. So I think when an employer demonstrates that strong commitment to data privacy, they're doing nothing but building trust and goodwill within the organization. Or maybe a better way to articulate this is by contrast. Those data breaches certainly erode trust. If an organization has their employee data breached, those employees are probably not feeling real good about the morale and the productivity within the organization. Mitigating additional security risks probably goes without saying, but I will say that just a little context here or an anecdote. An organization called BreachLock put out a statement saying that threat actors often target HR software to steal personal information for identity theft and fraud. Implementing robust data protection strategies is essential to minimize the risk of such incidents and safeguard both employees and the business itself. And there have been numerous instances of sensitive PII being breached. Hundreds of millions of records, and then obviously those records are being sold and shared kind of, I'd say, in the dark web or through some unsavory means. And we believe wholeheartedly that those records are what's used to start identity theft. We saw a rash of identity theft occur around many different areas when the pandemic first broke in 2020. The unemployment space was really, really impacted by that. We're talking tens of millions of fraudulent claims filed over the course of a few months. Those are the types of impacts that happen down the road after this sensitive employee data is breached. Because when you think about the information that employers have in platform, it's everything that those bad actors, those malicious actors want. It's social security numbers, it's addresses, it's job titles, it's rate of pay information, it's potentially bank account information for some of the direct deposit information that an employer houses. So those future security risks or future impacts are even very painful for the employees. An area that probably doesn't get enough focus is that by implementing proper practices around data privacy and data protection, you are actually preserving employee rights. Many of these privacy regulations that are rolling out are to articulate the employee's rights to data privacy. So at a high level, the employees have a right to know how that personal information of theirs is being used, how you're protecting it as an organization. And when you implement those data protection strategies, that's ensuring transparency, and it empowers the employees to exercise those rights to data access, data correction, data deletion, and opt-outs as stipulated by privacy regulations. Those are some of the things that should be part of your third-party obligations, third-party assessments, is understanding how the vendor enables data access, data correction, data deletion, and opt-out. I think by doing this, it kind of goes hand in hand with that second point about employee trust, but the next one, fostering a positive organizational culture. By respecting employee data, that reflects positively on an organization's values and cultures. Prioritizing that data privacy creates a more security conscious workforce, and it does contribute to a higher employee morale, engagement, and overall job satisfaction. The last one I'm going to touch on here is just supporting employee well-being. And it is that, again, it feels like a reiteration, but I don't think we can hammer this point enough, the impact of these processes and procedures to the morale and the culture and the employee well-being. So at the end of the day, data privacy is absolutely linked to employee well-being. And by protecting that personal information, you're demonstrating your commitment to the overall well-being of your employee population, enabling them to focus on work without any stress around potential data breaches. So again, I will pause as we shift over to kind of the wrap up here and see what questions we may have out there.
Yeah, we'll give it just another second to see if there are any questions. I did have one that has come up. So you mentioned like the employee well-being component, and I was curious if you've ever seen employers showcase their commitment to data privacy as a point, like in their employer branding. I've never thought of this because like Mobrium is in the space of employer branding, showcasing the culture and the good, your reputation as an employer, your ratings and reviews, and we help employers identify the things they're good at. And this is a real point that I never really thought of, but maybe you have a job seeker that would consider this as like a deal breaker to them, or something that would help convince them to have more desire to work there because their employer's really taking their data security seriously. I don't know if you've ever seen that as kind of a marketing point for recruiting.
Yeah, not exactly in that way, Matt. We'd love to get there, and in fact, that's kind of some messaging here at Vault that we've tested with talent acquisition, because obviously we're trying to get to as many stakeholders as possible, and we just talk about enabling a better solution that we have. So talent acquisition is one that we would end up getting engaged with at various association events, whether it is SHRM or HR Tech or one of those industry conferences. And I think everybody kind of agrees with it, but I'd say we have yet to see anybody actually take it to that level. Now, I will say that we've had a couple of instances where organizations, when they say switch from another HR provider who has this bulk data integration where they're touching employee data every pay period, whether they need it or not, they switch from that model to Vault Verify, where we have a very clear data minimization set of practices that they have actually done outreach to their employee base, driven by their marketing team, because it is something that they feel proud of. Hey, we're taking these actions to better protect your data, to better foster a data privacy environment. And they've actually done communications out to the employee population. And it's really beneficial for two reasons from our perspective. One, it does deliver that message out that helps foster that positive culture and employee well-being. But then also with our solution specifically, having the employee aware of how we engage and how we support them, that helps the solution. It streamlines everything for the employee, the employers, and those third parties that we work with on the employee's behalf. So I gave you a long-winded way to say, no, we haven't seen that, but we have seen some marketing and outreach to the employees. I do think there is some value in that messaging if we could find an organization that would take that step to begin putting that in their onboarding and talent acquisition talking points.
Very interesting. Yeah, it almost feels like the opportunity to have the sign in the warehouse that says, X number of days since an accident, something like that. But then comparing it to benchmarks that show you're actually doing a really good job in that space. It looks like Dave said, thank you for highlighting the importance of data privacy. And then with just our few minutes left here, I'll watch for any remaining questions. But yeah, we'd love to get your contact info for anyone who wants to learn more.
Yep, and I just popped it up on the screen here. So I'd say there's two paths here. You can jump onto our website. We have some good content around data privacy. We have some good content around what we believe to be better data integration practices that we fully support. And honestly, I think we've pioneered some pretty unique new approaches to data engagement in the third-party space for HR organizations. But I'm also happy to be a point of contact. My email's right there. If you have questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. We'll leave that up on the screen here for a couple of minutes so you can jot it down, Matt. I assume maybe we'll send a copy of the deck and follow up as well.
Yep.
But yeah, happy to answer any questions. All right. Well, it seems like we have a quiet group this afternoon. That's okay.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining.
Okay. Well, Matt, I don't have anything else if there are no other questions here.
Okay. It looks like we've got another thank you in the comments, which is awesome. And then just as we kind of wrap up here, want to give a huge thank you to Donny for sharing these valuable insights around the importance of protecting data in the employer use case. I definitely learned some new things. One thing that I learned is the bad actors definitely like to target employers because of their wealth of data. That's all those data pieces that they want. So HR definitely has a stake in ensuring data protection here. And maybe we don't own that piece in our organization, depending on how our organization is set up or the size. But it is important to care about this and maybe at least ask our leadership and our technology leaders what's in place now, so that we as HR leaders can be informed of what should be done there. So I think that's really great. And then just kind of in closing here, I'm going to give you a preview, everyone, to what we have planned for next month. This event today was recorded, and so we'll get that recording shared out with everyone. Next month in September, we're welcoming Travis from Career Launch Talent Group. He's going to be talking about enhancing the candidate experience for those who don't get selected, and why that matters, and how you can level up that experience. So definitely tune in next month. And then just a thank you from the Mobrium team. Thanks for joining us. If you have any interest in learning more about how we can help you with your employer ratings and reviews, contact us, email, or visit our website, and we can do a free audit of your employer reputation, how you're showing up on Glassdoor and Indeed and other sites. So just as Donny mentioned, that reputation piece is critically important. And so we'd love to be able to help with that. So thanks everyone for joining us today. And until next month, we'll see you then.